Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone again. Today, we are here to have an awesome webinar, and we have a great expert with us here who's an awesome advisor at MetaWorldX. And what we're going to be covering today is super interesting, with everything that's going on lately, especially in the climate change space and smart city space. What we're going to be unlocking today is discussing more about smart cities, the concept of digital twins, and climate tech, and how it all comes together with IoT devices and the metaverse. So, without further ado, I'm excited to welcome a good friend of mine and an advisor at MetaWorldX, Mr. Kyle Benham. Welcome.
Hey, nice to see you, Raza. Glad to be here today.
Awesome, Kyle. It's such a pleasure having you here today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks that are seeing you here for the first time?
Yeah, so you can tell by my gray hair, I've been around for a little while. I've spent a lot of time in sort of municipal government. Started in the City of Toronto a number of years ago, and like 17, 20 years at the City of Toronto, and then a bunch of other municipalities after that. So Burlington, Milton, Caledon, and then ultimately Oshawa, where I eventually retired from. And the interesting thing about the Oshawa gig was I was the guy that was in charge of their smart city application going back a few years. So that put me into that space quite a lot. And unfortunately, we didn't win. I like to think we came in second place, but second place is, you're still the first loser, I guess. But having said that, spent a lot of time looking at that whole sort of space, as well as just sort of the portfolio in my municipal career. It was really about bringing, I guess, innovation to the city, to the companies that are there, and then ultimately, how do you bring that back into City Hall? And then ultimately, the extra ultimate is how do you then take that back out to the public and make it that understandable to them? So I'm just going to stop there because I could go on forever about my career, but you guys don't want to hear it.
So that's like absolutely phenomenal, because especially in the last couple of decades, what we've been seeing, and me being having an urban planning background myself, we feel, in cities especially, that there's a huge need to kind of adapt or keep up with technology, but each city and each town is at a different kind of place in their digital transformation journey. And you must have seen that working with some of the smaller towns to the larger cities that you've worked with, right? So what would be some examples of like the challenges of like a small town versus a large city?
Well, I guess small towns versus large city. In many ways, I think all of the municipalities that are out there, be them large or be they small, are struggling with this demand for more open data from their citizens. And how do we actually do that? So, I mean, the first piece of all of that was, okay, here are sort of the data sets that we have that we think we can make available to people that we don't know what the hell they're going to do with it. And so there was a lot of discomfort in that, and that sort of varied from big cities, which are actually a little bit more tightly controlled, versus the smaller ones that are, or the medium-sized ones that are said, yeah, okay, who cares? You know, it's there, we got that data, let's use it. And so that was a good start. And I think that got everybody on their smart city journey to a certain extent. And you can really see kind of, the leaders in that field that have put a lot out there, and then the laggards that, okay, we got 2 data sets here, go play with it, that sort of thing. And so in terms of large and small, in many ways, it just comes down to municipal leadership. People that are able to look a little bit forward and say, you know what, we're going to be facing different challenges coming forward. We're going to need to respond to our constituency, senior levels of government, and others in a better way than we've been able to do before. And I think in many ways that's what a lot of the smart city stuff is out. And then we get into a bit more in terms of analytics and all of that going forward. But I think the first start is just that. It's, when something happens out there in the world, and I think this week there's been 3 or 4 climate disasters, and who do you call first? You call the municipal government. You don't call your federal government. You don't call your state or provincial government. It's the local guys. It's the people that you know. And so if there's ever going to be a level of government that needs to be, quite frankly, better prepared for the immediate kind of needs of people, it's going to be the municipal world. And I think that's in many ways where a lot of the smart city plays in. And then to do it even better, let's not just react. Let's anticipate, let's plan for the future. But you got to start somewhere. And so I think the first place is, let's just make sure we got our act in place. We've got sort of our city data in place so that when this stuff happens, we can respond both to our citizens, to our council, and then to the other levels of government.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the concept of smart cities, like where was the first time, do you recall the first time you know, it was brought to your attention or you heard about it? Was it at a conference? Was it internally with the counselors?
So I guess, you know, part of my portfolio over the years was around sort of the IT world and some of the cybersecurity and things like that. So I was probably one of the early adapters or the early people in the municipality that was aware of this thing coming forward. Because you got to appreciate, a municipality is a bunch of different business lines. I don't want to call them silos because I don't believe that's true, but business lines. So you got somebody that's doing roads, you got somebody that's doing water, you got somebody doing sewers, social services, public health, planning, development. And so it's one of these, you know, municipality is a funny company that doesn't have just one product or a couple of products. It's got more than anybody else would really want to deal with. And so I think when I first became aware of this, it was like, look, there's a bunch of things that are happening out there in these individual business lines that they're doing it for their own purposes, which made perfect sense. They're trying to get a handle on sort of their own business line, figure out where it's going. And the real issue was that connections across the corporation and, you know, particularly at the senior management level, because these are the kind of questions that, you know, I'm getting at, you know, the city managers, the deputy city managers kind of tables and conversations, the directors meetings in terms of, okay, fine, you know, my group is doing this, your group is doing that. And then sort of the stony silence around the table in terms of, okay, how does that all work together? And that was the piece that we were really kind of started struggling with. And I don't think we were alone. And I think that's where the smart city stuff really starts to play in terms of be able to bring all those pieces together. And so, you know, if you're looking for evidence-based, if you're looking for sort of something that's going to withstand scrutiny at the end of the day, you kind of got to go down that route because that's going to be the expectations. And it's not just, you know, from your colleagues, but, you know, that's what the world is asking for because they're seeing it elsewhere. So if you're looking at, you know, someplace that's out there, and you know, I've spent a bit of time in China, and they're looking at, you know, here's what's happening in the city. Here's the presentation model. Well, yeah, it's still a $250,000 sort of model. It's just static the day they built it. But that's the idea in terms of being able to explain what the hell's going on in your municipality. And I'm starting to ramble, so I'll let you go on to the next question here.
That was one of the inspirations for me when I first started playing SimCity as a kid, was understanding how things are laid out and how that has a direct impact on the quality of life for the citizens living in that area. And when you start getting into it and you get older, you realize it's not as simple as just, okay, we need something built here, let's go and build it. There's so many ramifications, you know, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to, you know, public engagement and getting the right stakeholders and timing and mayors and et cetera. And then you start to realize that, no, you actually need kind of, you need tools that can help reduce some of the friction in these areas. And this is why I personally believe digital technologies can really help with that. We just didn't have any of this back then when we were studying. We were using certain technologies like ArcGIS, and we were using AutoCAD and SketchUp. It's all great, but it it's kind of like more reactionary. It doesn't help you prepare for what's coming. And now with the advent of IoT devices and how quickly they're advancing, and then this concept of digital twins that we're about to talk about, it's like we're finally in a position where cities and municipalities can actually start setting the precedents to developers, to stakeholders, to industries, and letting the citizens know that, look, together we can come up with what makes sense: smart densification, better transportation, transit-oriented developments. These concepts now can more easily be communicated throughout different levels of government and public society. And I think that this is what was lacking in the past, what was missing. And whether it's a small town to a large city, digital access is growing. Digital access is there. Now it's about digital comfort, allowing people to be able to see what's happening, to be able to access this information. What is IoT sensors? What are data analytics? Why do we need real-time monitoring of certain assets? And what can we do with it? So having the data is great. Having it communicate with each other is important, but it's what you can do with it, the decision making, the ability to reduce time to get work done, the ability to reduce costs to get work done. And that brings us now into, Kyle, like the concept of digital twins and smart cities. I'd love to hear your take on what are digital twins, and what do you think, how does that affect planning or development for municipalities?
Sure. So I think a digital twin really does a couple of things, or three or four things, right? And so the first was really around data integration. It's really the fact that you've got all these business lines within a municipality, within a government, and they've all have got some sort of ownership because they use it for their own purposes of sort of the data that they've got. And they're all kind of moving to the point, once you kind of strip out some of the privacy concerns, and I don't want to minimize those because they're real, but once you kind of get beyond that sort of piece, all of a sudden you've got 12 different disparate data sets. And so the first piece is, how do you integrate those? How do you bring them all in? How do you put them to the point so that you can cross-reference them? And I'm not going to get into the technologies here. That's your job to a great extent, more than mine. But the point is, once you pull all those together, you can start to see some of those connections, if you will. And then the next piece is really coming down into the whole integration piece. No, that's data integration. The analytics, I'm sorry, that's the next piece, is the analytics. Okay, now we've got all this. How do we actually make some sense of it? How do we actually look at some of the correlations between, a very simple project that we were working on, traffic volume and air quality? Yeah, you know what? Not all that sexy, not all that surprising results. Yeah, if you got a bunch of people sitting at a stoplight putting out hydrocarbons, yeah, you're going to have higher levels of pollution at that point. But it gave us a chance to say, A, it's real, and then B, what are some of the policy variables that we could look at it? And so, from a very simple perspective, is it about the timing of the bloody lights, for example, in terms of moving people through the intersection quicker? And then more creatively, are there other solutions in terms of, maybe we should be looking to move traffic a little bit more onto this road versus the others, and that becomes more of a traffic planning sort of things. So that's that whole analysis piece in terms of trying to make those connections. And then the third piece, excuse me, is really about, fine, we've got data, we think we've got some interesting kind of policy directions or some findings that we've had there. How the hell do we tell people about it? And, I'm thinking of, literally 30 years of public meetings that I've been through. My poor daughter, I drug her out to one going back years ago, and she said, "Oh, Dad, if I had to do your job, I'd kill myself." And she did not go into city planning, let me tell you, or economic development. But the long and short is, you've got to be able to communicate that to people. And that's not just the residents that are out there. And I think that's becoming kind of more and more important, particularly when you look at, and I'm going to digress just a second here, if you look at sort of the local media kind of stuff that's happening, and even this week, and it's very much an Ontario sort of piece, they've canceled all the local newspapers across the province. And so how are you going to now communicate with your constituency if there's really sort of no local source? You got to go directly, and you've got to go in a way that's going to be able to actually communicate to them, show them what's happening. And I think it's the showing the piece. It's one thing to, trust me, put up a big graph with a bunch of numbers on it, and yeah, okay, you're just going to glaze over, but you got to be able to show them. So that takes us back kind of to your question, I guess, about sort of the urban planning and sort of the development side of things. Is that is so crucial. It's one thing to, be able to show it on a flat map, quite frankly. And even on a flat map, the best you're going to be able to do some lines and some colors and all of those sorts of wonderful things that are there. And trust me, I've done it. But it's that dynamic quality in terms of the visualization. It's like, here we are today. Here's what's on the ground. Here's what we know we've got either approved or coming into the pipeline. And then from that, and then where are the other pieces that we would like to focus or direct development? And, you can't do that in a heavy-handed manner. You've got to convince people that, yeah, that's a good investment. It makes some sense to do that. And that's where kind of the whole visualization or the whole piece comes in, is that you're able to provide not only something that's factually based on like real data, that you've done some of the work around it, that we think these are the important variables. And if you don't agree, tell us, because we can redo it and look at kind of, okay, how would that look if you put this one in versus that one? And then finally, and this is what it's going to look like this year, next year, 10 years. And I think that's a key piece. And it's important not only from just kind of a engaging your citizens perspective, which I think is becoming, quite frankly, harder. Well, harder in one ways in terms of attention span, easier in another way in terms of just the technology that's out there. So, doing a public meeting where at 7 o'clock at night, because that's the only time that you think you can get people out, if you got something up on sort of the internet, the website, a digital twin, you could be doing a public meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning, quite frankly, when Absolutely. Somebody's got their time to do it. And so,
especially if someone has accessibility,
well, precisely, right? And there's a lot of, different filters that you can kind of put in there to make that. So I think what we're really looking at here is moving from, I guess, kind of very much a static, I'll call it map-based, with full respect, quite frankly, because, I've been there for years and I'm a map collector myself. But at the end of the day, that's not what people are really looking for. And so that was the citizen side. Secondly, you've got to be able to convince your own political colleagues that A, we got a problem, or A, we don't have a problem, this is what we need. And then secondly, it's the senior levels of government. So, again, we come back to the disaster scenario, right? Something happens, tornado, whatever that happens in the community, big smog day, whatever. The first question the senior government is going to ask is, well, what do you need?
Yeah.
And quite often it'll take you 2 weeks, a month to get to that point.
Yeah.
And so, a digital twin lets you get there in a day, in half a day, 2 hours, quite frankly, because you've got some of the data, you've got the integration. This is going to be our biggest pain point, be it a bridge, be it a water failure system, be it whatever. You said, let's just not pay attention to this thing because, we're getting a lot of noise about it. But This is the stuff that's going to really hurt us in the long term if we don't pay attention to it.
100%. I love that. And it's critical to be able to assess what has happened historically, what is happening currently, in order to understand where do we need to deploy resources in the future. It's not just about efficiency, it's about saving lives. And you could be ahead of the problem, definitely, especially with what we're seeing in coastal areas and some of the work we're doing over there. But I can't believe how quickly time's going. And Kyle, I really wanted to get to this. So first of all, there's in front of me a Novae Res Urbis article that you were featured in. So congratulations on that. And
thank you.
Would love to hear more about what you discussed in this piece for the viewers that haven't had a chance to read this yet.
Well, it was actually a really kind of interesting sort of discussion we had. So this is a Novae Res Urbis is a it's an industry publication, and it's kind of, well, it's well respected in Ontario. Everybody in the development, planning, municipal world kind of reads it, and it really is a really good source in terms of, okay, here's what's happening in the various municipalities as we go sort of forward. So we thought it would actually be a good opportunity to talk to sort of that as a publication, just to let them know what we're doing, but equally important to highlight sort of one of the projects that MetaWorldX is working on, which is in the town of Aurora. And it's really a very good example, because if you look at it, they've got kind of a downtown area that they're looking to develop, and it's really showing what's going on here, and then where's the future infrastructure going, what's in the ground now in terms of development, what are the development sites that are available, if they're developed, what will they look like. And it can be silly as things as, should we be talking 12 stories or 20 stories, and some of the shadowing effects. And this is the great thing about, I don't know, kind of the time we're in, is that a lot of those questions cannot be answered with just municipal data. You've got to be able to bring in data from other sources. And I'll give, our friends at MetaWorldX here, full thing. They've been able to bring in some external sort of data sources that you can integrate with the local things, to really give you that sort of complete picture. And it can be as simple as, I can't even remember how long it took to get a shadow study done going back a number of years ago, in terms of, you got a building that's this high and then there's the shadows that are there. But I mean, technology we've got now, you can do it in 10 minutes, basically.
Yep.
I may be exaggerating, but it's almost like that. But those are data sets that are coming in from elsewhere. So, it's the solar stuff, it's the air quality, it's the pieces that you're able to kind of layer together that will have an impact on your local data sets, if you will. And then vice versa, if you're doing something really interesting or stupid, are you affecting the larger kind of world as it goes with it? But I think that's kind of where we're at right now, is bringing all that stuff together.
Absolutely, because it's like, I can't even imagine what it was like doing shadow impacts back in the day. Without these kind of technologies, it must have been such a challenge. And today we take it for granted, where we're just like, okay, we have all of this data, we have all of this information. And actually, you know what, we do need it more now than ever before, especially with air rights and the densification of our cities and our transit-oriented developments. One thing that I just wanted to ask you was, sometimes when it comes to security or data privacy around these kind of technologies, how would a municipality react to that? Is that a huge concern, and how would you go about kind of protecting that information?
Yeah, well, I think, and the general rule, and I'm not going to quote statutes and things like that because I don't want to. It's about being able to identify an individual person or an individual kind of activity. And so it's very easy to kind of step away from that and take it up kind of one or two levels and say, okay, we're going to aggregate this into sort of still small areas, but we still got the data points that are there, and then into the larger city. So, we're in discussions about employment data right now, right? And it's got some privacy concerns, because when the municipalities collect it, they say, okay, we're going to keep your data private, and fine and good. We don't need to know kind of what company X, looking at your T-shirt there, is doing at that site with those many employees. What we need to know is, what are they doing in that area? How are they part of sort of that sort of employment district? I'll just use that as an example, and kind of what sector they're in, and have they been growing, shrinking, that sort of stuff. But you don't have to release that stuff. So, and I've run into municipalities where, oh my God, they just can't do it. They just can't get their minds around it. And you get others that say, you know what, as long as we're not providing information on individual people, and we can keep it relatively, we keep it secure, then why are we not using it?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of almost the kind of the big step that needs to be taken. So we've got this. Why aren't we using it? Now, granted, there's some technology side in there. If you're dealing with big old Excel spreadsheets, it's only going to take you so far, right?
Yeah.
But that's changing, and that's moved, and I think this is where kind of the digital twin stuff really starts to play into that in terms of bringing all that stuff together, and then again being able to analyze it and then show it.
So does this mean that we're actually getting closer to, citizen engagement, businesses, technology, and municipalities actually coming closer together rather than? Yep. So that's good news.
Well, I think so, and I think there may be two pieces. One is just it's demand driven, and I think we've seen this actually going back to like early days of smart cities. It was really about just electronic access for citizens to municipal services. And, how can I get my Parks and Rec permit, get my kid into dance lessons, better than having to stand in line. And so they went into that whole sort of e-commerce kind of piece, if you will, around sort of municipal services. And it only got them so far. So I think we're now into that kind of next range. And I think, that helped kind of get them a little bit more into that space. And now it's really the fact that there's so much more that can be done with it to really, help the, strengthen the municipality, make it more livable, all those sort of wonderful things that go with that. And then also be able to see yourself in the context of not only your municipality, but even in sort of a larger area, provincial sort of thing in terms of things that are going around. It comes back to some of that environmental stuff and those other data sets that are going to be in there. If we're going to have 35-degree days for 2 weeks, what are we going to do about it? And, how's that going to play out in sort of, our parks, our wading pools? How is it going to play out in terms of our priority neighborhoods, where people don't have options around air conditioning and things like that? Do we need to be shifting resources a little around to prepare for that? And again, it's an art. You don't want to overreact, but you sure as hell don't want to underreact.
Correct.
Because that's when you get nothing but grief.
So like a healthy balance between, how like obviously economic development, public safety, security, to be proactive in these areas is you find critical for municipalities, right?
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to your citizens are asking for more of that. And the citizens are driving their councilors. So it's always amused me, quite frankly. You've always got a handful of councilors that are really looking ahead, and just it's a personality thing as much as anything else. Trust me, about what about this? What about digital twins? What about my constituencies want to be able to do this electronically versus not? And so it's that demand that actually pushes this. And full respect to my municipal colleagues, it's about balancing that and how do you bring it on? How do you schedule it? How do you sort of accommodate? How do you sort of change those systems over time? And it's not easy.
Yeah.
Even the introduction of like 311 systems, that was a huge change. This is that information system you get to the municipal level. And that was a huge change. And that took a while to get all of that in place. But once it's there, people are used to it. They want more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think the digital
dynamic culture. Yeah.
Dynamic culture. That's exactly it. And so you start to pull all those pieces together in terms of, that's what people are looking forward. In theory, a municipality and any level of government should be able to deliver it. And I understand sort of the dynamics that are there, but that demand's not going away. And particularly as we get into sort of more critical situations and stuff, and I don't want to dwell on the negative at all, but it's more positive.
So, I mean, like, especially here in Canada, there's a lot of issues that we're currently facing, that cities are at the forefront of, and with the rise in immigration and the shortage in housing, and also the need for greater resources for municipalities to service the citizens and the strain on our hospital system. These are daily factors that municipalities and cities have to deal with. Digital technologies, it sounds great to be able to, reduce headaches, but it takes a lot of effort for municipalities to really roll up their sleeves and be like, okay, we want to now start looking at this. How can we reduce the burden of municipalities and especially municipal staff to kind of ease their transition, especially when using digital twins for smart cities?
Well, and that's a good point, because I think a few years ago, it was a burden. I mean, it really was. And I think, systems like MetaWorldX really help cut that down quite a lot, right? You've got your data set, you don't have to compromise it. Over time, you may want to tweak it so that it works better with other things. But that's a fair comment. You should be doing that anyway, just so that it works for yourself. And so I really think that they're at a point where everybody's starting to realize we've only got, part of the puzzle. And for us to actually deal with it, we've got to kind of take a much broader sort of view. And that's where the digital twin stuff really starts to play in. And by the way, you can see it at the end of the day too. You just don't have to.
Absolutely.
You don't have to take. And to your point, I think, overlaying infrastructure plans and the development stuff. You know what? You can see there's a gap already in terms of, our infrastructure is going that way. We've given development approvals up there that way. That's 15 years out. So maybe we should be thinking about maybe changing our capital budget to move it one way or the other, or be talking to these guys, the developers, saying, okay, guys, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to get you guys into the ground sooner?
Absolutely. That's such a critical point, especially in our journey towards building smart communities. It's important to have these digital assets and these digital tools to be able to help manage. But I'm so sad to say, Kyle, we're out of time. I don't know where time went. I'm so honored to spend every minute that I get with you, learning from you, and I hope that everybody watching, that you were able to gain knowledge as I did from Kyle's immense experience and now his journey into the digital world. So, Kyle, thank you so much for this, and we're so honored to have you.
It's been my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Awesome. See you guys next time. Ciao.
Okay, bye-bye.